So thank you, Justin. That was great. Appreciate it. And I'm happy to be here today and appreciate every one of you being here as well. What Justin didn't say is that I grew up in Arkansas. We had a small farm in South Arkansas. We grew corn and we had some cattle. And like Justin, I also played football. I thought I was pretty good, and my dad liked to point out I was small, but I was slow. Despite that, I got recruited to play at the Air Force Academy, and felt good about that, and I showed up, and there were 150 other freshman football players there. After a couple of weeks, they put out the first depth chart where they show who the starter is and who the backup is, and I kept reading down, and I was number 8. I was a running back, and we ran the wishbone, so we actually had 2 halfbacks. So one could argue that I was 8th on my side and behind 7 other guys on the other side. I was really 16th on the depth chart. It was a shocking moment because I'd never really played for a team I hadn't started for before. But I sort of put my head down and worked on it, and by the start of the season, I was 4th. And then we got a couple of games into the season, and Notre Dame was coming to the Air Force Academy to play. We had a home and away at that point, and it was Notre Dame's time to come for us. It's a big game in Colorado Springs. There's 50,000 people in the stadium. And the starter on my side was hurt, so I actually entered the game 3rd on the depth chart. First half, the guy who started got hurt. And early in the second half, the guy right in front of me caught a pitch, got tackled by the middle linebacker, and the guy tackled him by grabbing his thigh pad and literally ripping his pants as he tackled him. So that guy, whose name was Greg Johnson, comes running over to the sidelines, his pants flapping. And the running back coach, Coach Rucker, looked around and said, "Perry, get over here." My moment. I grabbed my helmet, I put it on, and I buckled up, I put my mouthpiece in, and I ran over, and he said, "Perry, take off your pants." So it was that moment I realized that football was probably not going to be my future, and I began to focus on other stuff. I got a chemical engineering degree and an MBA, and I became an entrepreneur. In the last 20 years, I've spent running and building either software companies or biotech, sort of human health companies. And in 2014, I had the opportunity to sort of step back and say, what do I want to do next? I've kind of gotten to the point I can focus on anything I want to. What is that? And I concluded that some of the biggest problems that we face, as a society and as a planet, are the problems of food and agriculture. Namely, there are 4. How do we feed everybody? There are going to be 10 billion people on the planet in 2050. That's just over 30 years from now. That's a remarkable increase. We're going to need about 70% more food by then if all the trends continue. So, how are we going to produce enough food to feed all those people? How are we going to do it in a way that doesn't use all our resources? How can we do it in a way that supports consumer health? And then finally, all that won't work unless we can make farming a more profitable profession. And so I set out to look for businesses to start or things to buy or technologies to license that would support that. I found the predecessor to Indigo Ag in Cambridge, Massachusetts. At the time, it was 13 scientists from MIT working on the idea that microbes found in nature could be used to support plant health, to help plants deal with the stress they deal with every year, whether that's water stress or nutrient stress or stress from pests and insects. At the time, I thought it was the most interesting combination of technology and unmet need that I'd seen. Here's a technology that offers the promise of increasing yields and decreasing fertilizer and chemical use, and at the same time, it's something that the average consumer already understands and thinks is good for them. We see the idea of probiotics or human microbiome products increasingly. And so the idea of using microbes to promote plant health seemed like something that consumers would not just tolerate but embrace. And so that was January of 2015. We've made a lot of progress since then, and this is just a few facts about where Indigo is today. We have about 500 employees, so we're just over 4 years old, and about a year ago we had fewer than 200 employees. So we're growing relatively rapidly. That initial group in Cambridge now forms the core of our research and development group, which is in Boston, Massachusetts. We have about 300 people there. Mostly they're in research and development, where we have microbiologists and plant scientists and laboratories and grow rooms, where we work on binding and productizing microbial products. But of course, Boston's a great place to be if you need to be world-class in microbiology. It's not a great place to be if you want to talk to your customers. So we set up our core commercial operation in Memphis, Tennessee, and that's where we have all our sales and marketing, and that's where I spend most of my time and have my home. We've raised about $650 million to do this. Part of that hasn't been announced yet and will be announced in early September. I bring that amount up not because it guarantees success. We have big ambitions, and our success is not yet assured. But it guarantees that we're not dabbling. We're putting a huge amount of our time and energy into this, and we've been able to attract a whole bunch of money to do it as well. So we're not the only ones who think it's time for a more sustainable and more profitable form of agriculture. We've attracted a lot of investors who see the same opportunity. And so far that's going well from a commercial perspective as well. Like most technology companies, we spent most of the first 2 or 3 years just working on science. So we had no commercial operations until last year. We spent the first 2 or 3 years just doing science, converting those to products, and then testing those in labs and greenhouses and field trials. We were on about 55,000 commercial acres last year, and we'll be on over 1 million acres this year. About 60% of that will be wheat, and we're also in corn, soy, rice, and cotton. So this is how we think about Indigo. Our mission is harnessing nature to help farmers sustainably feed the planet. And there's 3 core pillars to that: improving farm profitability, improving environmental sustainability, and improving consumer health. And as you'll see as I talk more, we're working on a lot of things. All of them fall underneath this mission and support at least one of those pillars. We won't do anything that doesn't either improve farm profitability, environmental sustainability, or consumer health. But anything that does fall under that, we feel like it's fair game. Well, let me spend 4 or 5 slides here talking about what we saw as the state of the industry when we started this 3 years ago. Like, what's the problem, and why does this opportunity exist? Namely, it's that innovation has really plateaued in agriculture. Modern ag is built on 4 things. It's breeding plants and producing better seeds, fertilizing them with synthetic fertilizer, using chemical technology to produce insecticides and fungicides, and then more recently, GMOs and traits. And all 4 of those have largely plateaued. Fertilizer is obvious. This is a 40-year chart starting in 1975. I mean, we haven't seen much innovation in fertilizer over that time. The same is true in chemistry. Chemistry evolved rapidly post-World War II, but in the last 15 years, there's only been 1 new chemical entity approved by the EPA. I mean, it's almost impossible to get a new agricultural chemical through the EPA. So, any improvements in chemistry now are really reformulations of existing molecules or combinations of those. The same is roughly true for breeding. The exception to this is probably corn. I mean, we're still getting real improvements in corn, especially in this area, corn that's more tolerant of dry conditions. But if you take a soybean seed from 20 years ago and one today, you'll get undetectable differences in yield. I mean, almost no difference in genetic potential of that soybean seed. And largely that's true in wheat and rice and other major grain crops. And then, GMOs are where we think of most of the innovation has been, and that was certainly true in the mid-90s. The trait of Roundup Ready tolerance and BT, fundamentally changed farming in a lot of regions. But since then, almost everything is a variation on those, either insect tolerance or herbicide tolerance. The traits of the promise of traits that would deliver yield improvements or drought tolerance haven't really materialized. As that happens, so as it happens in most industries, once innovation plateaus, revenue plateaus as well, and companies start to merge so that they can cut cost and continue to grow profitability even though they're no longer innovating. And we're seeing that here. Dow and DuPont have merged. Kim China has purchased Syngenta. Bayer has purchased Monsanto. And now 70 to 75% of the global seed and pesticide market are controlled by the companies on these slides. That, of course, gives them an enormous amount of pricing power. You got 4 or 5 big suppliers, and you've got hundreds of thousands of farmers. When you have that sort of imbalance in power, these companies get to set the price, essentially. None of us is big enough to negotiate a chemical price with Dow. And the result of that is those input prices have increased enormously. This is that same 40-year chart, so it starts in 1975. The blue line here is wheat yield. So those have improved. They're probably up 35% or so in the last 40 years, mostly due to improved farming practices. We just know better about how many seeds per acre to plant and when to fertilize than we did 40 years ago. During that same period of time, input prices of seeds, chemicals, and fertilizers are up 300%. And it's worth noting that most of that increase happened after 2000, after that curve started to plateau. That increase isn't because they're producing more valuable stuff, it's because they have the power to price whatever they want. Also, not surprisingly, that's hard on farm profitability. So the red line here is that same ag input price graph. The blue line is wheat price. So, in 1975, it was between $3.50 and $4. Now it's between $5 and $6. So we've seen a nice increase in commodity price over that period of time, and yet farmers aren't making any more money. And farm profitability is shown in those gray bars. So despite the fact that prices are up and yields have improved, farmers are really no better off today profitability-wise than they were in 1975. Another way of saying that is the input companies have managed to capture every single dollar of the value that they've created over that period of time. The story gets better from here after this slide. So this is the same chart, the red line being commodity price. The blue line is equipment cost per acre. So, the last one was input cost. Equipment costs have increased in a similar manner over the same period of time. So something's got to change. Right? It's impossible to ask farmers to continue to spend more and more money up front for new technology, continue to take the same risk on price and weather, pay more money for equipment, and not make any more money on the back end. Something fundamental has to shift here. And we're hoping to catalyze that shift in 3 ways. One is bringing innovation back into agriculture. So we're improving yields primarily based on two technologies, focusing on microbial technology and focusing on data sciences. Second is that we're working to increase crop prices by connecting buyers directly with growers. And we're doing that through a digital marketplace that I'm going to spend some time talking about in a moment. That takes cost out of the supply chain and decommoditizes agriculture. And I'll talk a lot about decommoditizing agriculture, but I think this is the key. You know, as long as U.S. farmers are creating products that are exactly the same as those produced in the Ukraine or in Brazil, it's going to be tough because those are lower cost regions. Doesn't cost as much for land, doesn't cost as much for labor. So if we're producing an undifferentiated product and we have a cost disadvantage, then that's a difficult spot to be. We may not ever be able to beat them on cost, but we can almost certainly beat them on quality. And the good news is consumers care more and more about quality. And so by connecting buyers directly with farmers and allowing farmers to get paid for that quality, we have the opportunity to start producing value-added products that consumers are willing to pay for and improve margins in the process. We're working directly with some of those buyers who are interested in, you know, high-quality, sustainably produced, identity-preserved grain. And you know, we'll talk to Bob right after this, who is one of those people. You notice I've got improved profitability 3 ways, but I have 4 things on the slide. We can't do the 4th one yet, but that's our goal. Oh, there's an opportunity to produce microbes that will do everything a chemical will do. You know, microbes in nature doesn't produce anything that it doesn't have something to counteract it. So there are microbes in nature that will fight off any insect or any pest. Our job is just to find it, and we're working on those things today. Ultimately, I think we'll be able to reduce the amount of chemical use by over 90% and fertilizer use by 25 to 50%. I don't know exactly when that is. You know, that's not going to happen overnight. It's probably more than 10 years away, but it's probably less than 20. And we will start to have those products out in the next couple of years. You know, they're in our R&D pipeline today. So why does microbiology create this opportunity? Because microbes are present in every living thing. We know this only in the last 10 years or so, largely through research done in human health. But we now know that every living thing contains microbes, and those living things microbes are required for plants, animals, and humans to survive and thrive. Microbes help us fight off disease, they help us absorb nutrients, and that's true in humans. And there are a whole bunch of human health products working their way through the FDA right now that are based on microbes. And it's true in plants. We've initially focused on environmental stresses, or abiotic, helping plants do better under water stress and nutrient stress. And ultimately, earlier in the pipeline, we have things that fight off insects and disease. One advantage of this approach is that we're sourcing microbes from nature. So we don't synthesize anything, we're not creating anything new. And that means that we're not adding anything new to the environment, and we're not adding anything new to the food supply chain. So when we look for approval from the USDA or the FDA, there's an assumption of safety here that works in our favor and dramatically shortens the process. So if you're trying to get a new chemical or trait approved, that is about a 10 to 15 year process and several $100 million, maybe $100 to $300 million. Our R&D process is 1 to 3 years and $3 to $5 million. And that allows us to completely change our mindset. For example, we can be iterative. Every year, we improve our products based on what we learned the year before. So, last year, as you'll see later, we had a 13 to 19% yield improvement in wheat. But we learned from that, and through improved formulation, adding a new microbe in, changing concentrations, we should do better than that this year. and we should do better than that next year. Every year we get to iterate and learn because that time frame and the cost are so short, in a way you could never do with chemicals or traits because of cost and time. So I'll leave microbiology for a moment. When Mike talks later, he'll talk more about the results we've seen from microbiology in crops. And I'm going to spend a few slides talking about marketplace. This is a digital marketplace that directly connects buyers with farmers. We launched this June 1st, so this is a relatively new aspect of our business, but it's growing remarkably fast. The hard part about any marketplace is that on day one, it's of no value to anybody. If you're trying to connect buyers and sellers, you don't have any buyers, you're of no value to farmers. And unfortunately, the inverse is true. If you don't have any farmers, you're of no value to buyers. So getting that started is a really expensive process. We're off to a great start. So we now have over 2,000 farmers who are selling through our marketplace and over 1,000 buyers representing hundreds of millions of dollars of bids. And I'll show you more on that in a moment. Indigo, after making that connection, Indigo assures quality, coordinates logistics, and manages payment, all of which are required, we think, to make this work well. So this is sort of a graphical representation of what we're doing. In many cases, we're connecting buyers and growers directly, but elevators are going to remain an important part of this. And elevators are some of our largest buyers today. Elevators are also sellers in this market. Ultimately, farmers being able to store grain on their own farm is going to become more and more important. Storing on your own farm allows you to do identity preservation and get out of the time crunch at harvest of having to send it wherever, whoever will take it in the moment, and it can't be too far away. If you can store on farm, there's a whole bunch of benefits there, but elevators will continue to play an important role in the near future, and marketplace incorporates them as well. From a grower perspective, there are a number of benefits to selling directly to growers. One of them is it just takes a bunch of people out of the process. So the average bushel of grain in the U.S. gets touched 3 or 4 times before it gets to its end user. Every one of those people takes a piece, and that increases the cost that the buyer has to pay and lessens the amount that the farmer gets. The more we can take those costs out of the system, the more the farmer can participate in the upside associated with that. But maybe the most important part is the identity preservation. As long as you're taking your grain and piling it into a silo with your neighbor's grain, there's no way to get paid for quality or sustainability. But once you can differentiate that, you can sell grain directly to people who are interested in paying for the specific quality that you have. Examples in marketplace today, there's an ADM bid in Arkansas City for 55 cents over if you have wheat that was grown from Monument or Mint. They're specific to that because they believe those varieties create better milling qualities. So if you're a grower who's done that and you've segregated that on your own farm, there's an opportunity to sell that for significantly more than you'd be able to otherwise. So this is how it works. As a grower, if you sign up and put virtual inventory on marketplace, you see bids from buyers in your area. Those are cash bids, they're basis bids, they have multiple time points, and you'll see them from elevators and flour mills and breweries and so forth. It's up to you. You can accept or reject those bids as you wish. There's no obligation to accept anything or to sell anything through marketplace. If you choose to do so, Indigo will coordinate delivery. You can deliver it yourself, or we'll arrange for a third party to do so. And then we ensure payment. So if you're dealing with somebody you've never dealt with before, we'll make sure that you get paid. And we have insurance ourselves, so we're assured of getting paid as well. Well, I mentioned earlier that the critical mass of buyers and sellers are going well. I've been running, technology companies for the last 20 years. I've never seen something grow at this rate before. So this map on June 1st would have had 0 dots on it. Well, everything you see up here we've done in the last 2.5 months. That's over 1,000 buyers representing about $20 billion a year of purchasing power and over $600 million worth of bids. There are over 2,000 growers there representing over $4 billion of inventory. Hey, it's a really good start. It's frankly not sufficient. While those numbers are big, critical mass is a hyper-local thing. And it doesn't help to have buyers if they're more than a couple hundred miles away. So you've got to create critical mass of buyers and sellers in every single geography. We're not there yet, but this pace indicates we're getting there in a hurry. So I'll move on from marketplace for a moment. As you can see, I've talked about a bunch of stuff that really ranges all the way across the supply chain. And that's a difficult thing to take on from Indigo's perspective, but we feel like it's necessary. One of the reasons I think agriculture has been slow to adopt new technologies that would be good for farmers and good for the environment and good for consumers is that the industry is not really structured to care. You've got input providers in silos that are selling seed and chemicals that aren't talking to the consumers at all. They're creating products that the consumers may or may not accept as healthy and sustainable. They're selling those through retailers to you as growers, and you're selling to grain companies who are selling to processors who are selling to consumer packaged goods companies. And there's really no communication today between the grower and the customer. And one of the fundamental things Indigo's doing is making that connection. We start with the customer. We provide transportation logistics to get to them. We provide a marketplace so that you can connect buyers and growers and customers directly. And then we provide technologies on the front end in terms of microbiology and data sciences that the customer will not only tolerate, but actually be attracted to. So that when you grow that product, you get a premium for it at the end. And that's our fundamental concept. This is what we're trying to accomplish. I think we're possibly on the cusp of a third revolution in agriculture. The first one was the Industrial Revolution, of course. Once we started to be able to use machines instead of horses to plow, et cetera, it was a huge increase in productivity. The second one, sort of the mid-1900s, was called the Green Revolution. It's when we learned how to synthesize nitrogen fertilizer, we learned how to use chemicals to kill pests, we learned better how to breed plants, and then later GMOs. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the Green Revolution. And that was the best science we had at the time, and the application of that science probably have allowed us to feed 1 billion people we wouldn't have been able to feed otherwise. It's just that we can do better today. The technologies exist to replace a lot of that. We just haven't yet adopted it because the input providers are so concentrated they're protecting their existing business. But technologies like microbiology are 10 years ahead of agriculture in things like human health. Technologies like data sciences are already fundamentally changing other industries. Think of Amazon in retail, or Uber in automobiles, or Facebook and Netflix in media. Those are companies that are enabled by data sciences that fundamentally change those industries, and that hasn't yet happened in agriculture. We think it's inevitable, though. Those technologies can have at least as big an impact in agriculture, and agriculture is arguably one of the largest and most important industries in the world. $3.2 trillion in GDP last year would put it at about 4th or 5th in the largest industries. And of course, it's fundamental to life on Earth, and it touches every person on Earth every single day. Indigo's not going to be able to make that we're not going to be able to make that revolution happen by ourselves, but there's going to be a lot of innovation from a lot of different people. But we think we can catalyze that change. Again, our success is far from assured. I mean, it's a big ambition, but it's what we spend every single day focused on making happen. And I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about it. Thank you very much.